Hello everybody, this is Antonio Wolf, walking around with my dog again. It's been a pretty good couple of weeks. Lots of rain, lots of nice clouds, lots of nice days. Somebody asked in the comments to my Hegelian systems and peak oil video, what do I mean by sublation? What is sublation? How do you define that? I just want to make a quick video about that. And sublation is actually pretty easy. It's a really simple concept when you actually think about it. Hegel gives a very trite definition that to sublate is to preserve and to cancel. That's the major thing. Of course, when you cancel something, you usually think about that being destroyed. When you preserve it, you obviously keep it going. So there's this misunderstanding from people about how that works. They think that you hear from Marxists quite a bit, especially about the phenomenology. Particularly this misunderstanding comes about from that, where sublation is supposed to take what is true in something and to raise it up to a higher level, so to say. So you have the forms of consciousness and the phenomenology of spirit, where, for example, in sense certainty, you find out that it just doesn't work, but you take what is true in that form of consciousness, and you carry that over to the next form of consciousness, which is not too far from the truth. But it's also quite far from the truth, because that doesn't quite explain what Hegel's doing. When you sublate something, you cancel it in the sense that you don't throw it away. There's nothing thrown away when you sublate things. You don't destroy it. You don't go and say, well, this is false and no good, and you throw it away. That's not what sublation does. Sublation cancels by limiting. When things are sublated, they are stripped of their absolute status. So you think, for example, bring a concrete example here. The most concrete, one of the most concrete and ones that we are familiar with is economics. That is that certain things are true to a certain extent in certain contexts, and if you try to be a fool who does not pay attention to the context, you're going to have a bad time, because the limit of what you're trying to apply is going to break through its limit, and it's going to undo its own foundation. For example, capital. Capitalism functions within a certain limit, a conceptual limit. If you attempt to go beyond that limit, you're going to have a bad time, as we very well know because of our constant economic crises. And to give you the concrete version of that, the basic commodities. Okay, Marx says a commodity is the contradiction of use value and exchange value. And now Marx posits this in a way that I think is legitimate. It makes sense, but it doesn't fully reveal how logical this contradiction actually is. Because Marx opposes use value and exchange value based on the object that is the commodity. Say, you're exchanging oranges for strawberries. The use values is the oranges and the strawberries that you will eat, plant, or whatever it is that you will do, that will consume their use. Whereas exchange is this purely ideal, abstract thing, that is quantified. If you exchange an orange for 5 strawberries or something like that, that would be the exchange value, that quantity of 5 in the exchange. But that's not what you logically comprehend if you're just looking at the pure categories. The reason the commodity is a contradiction is precisely because the only use value of a commodity as commodity is to exchange it. That's the contradiction. Usually, if you think it the way that Marx thinks it, it does seem contradictory. You either have one or the other, right? But no, the commodity is both at once. And it's both at once in one single moment. It's not that, well, I decided that I don't want the use value. No, you have the use value in the exchange value. That's the sublation. That you didn't have to get rid of one or the other. You didn't have to pick between use value and exchange value. You got both at once, fully. Now, you might not have gotten in the way that you wanted it. Maybe you would have liked to keep your orange, but also have those 5 strawberries. But that ain't gonna happen because that ain't the way commodities work. But the commodity is a sublation in that it takes this antithesis, supposedly, of use value and exchange value, and you get both. And the only difference is that there is a limit to what these categories mean. What does exchange value or use value actually do in this relationship? An ecosystem sublates all of its parts. In that, in the ecosystem, you don't get to say, well, the plants are more important than the animals, or the animals are more important than the plants, or maybe you think it's the fungi. Maybe you think, the water is more important, the carbon. That's the kind of thinking that got us in trouble, up to now. What are you doing? He's being silly. He doesn't even like water, but he went ahead and dipped his toes. Oh, I think he's seen like something splashing around this water. He wants to get at it. Might be a bug or something. Come on. So, in the ecosystem, every part is not absolute. You don't get to have the fauna over the flora or the flora over the fauna. Both of them are perfectly preserved, but they're limited. As they categorically are and as they existentially are. If you just let flora and fauna just go on an absolute trajectory of being what they are, they will destroy themselves. And of course this is it's hard to see because we only see it when things are really, really simple. The easiest thing is imagine a play. It's what's happened to us in a lot of places in America, for example, with deer. We got rid of the wolves, we got rid of the natural predators, and these populations skyrocketed out of our control. And you think it'd be good for the deers not to have the predators, because now they get to just flourish and be themselves, and no worries, it's deer paradise. Except it's not, because they eat a lot, they screw a lot, they have a lot of babies, and very quickly you get a population crash because they have more animals than there is food or area to be roaming through. So there has to be a limit. If you have monocrops, monoculture farming, it's a disaster. It's multiple times it's happened in our history already, and we don't fucking learn that if you're hinging on one species, one disease is going to wipe everything out. I'm not aware of too many times this has happened, but I'm certain it has happened definitely more than a few times. I know at least one, which is to do with the original banana that we all loved. Those delicious yellow bastards. Which God placed on this earth, perfectly fit for our hands, which is proof of creationism. It's a shout out to the banana argument against evolution. I forget what the species name was, but there was a bigger yellow banana that tasted pretty delicious up until about, I think, 70s maybe, and then there was a huge worldwide blight that just destroyed that species, and we had to scramble to find some other delicious bananas to artificially engineer through selective breeding to get something that tasted somewhat like that original banana, but it's not that original banana. And we have the same problems yet again, in which monocultures are going to lead to disasters in ecosystems everywhere. For example, here in the mountains of California, there was some sort of beetle that was brought in from the East Coast, and now it's decimating a bit of the pine population here, because there's no control on that beetle, and they just eat the bark of these trees from within and just kill them. And you drive through the hills here sometimes, up the mountains, and you can just see everywhere, there's just dead trees still left standing, but they're dead. And so if you wanted to have something that was sublating, you would have a unity in which these things were limited. You'd have something that, yes, the beetle can go ahead and live, but it's going to have a limit. And then so sublations work that way. So a sublation cancels the absolute status of its elements, but preserves them precisely as those elements. The wolf doesn't stop being a wolf, it just doesn't get to eat all the deer. And the deer doesn't stop being a deer, it just doesn't get to eat all the wolves. With a commodity, you don't have to let go of use value or exchange value. You get to have both, just in a very weird way. Very weird way. I mean, there's a logic to commodities which is actually really fascinating. Capital is like a logic of life. I mean, that's kind of what's interesting about it. It's got organic logic, which is why it's like a cancer. It's pretty good at being like a cancer. What it does very well, but without limits, without it being sublated, it destroys itself. Of course, the usual ideal is, oh, well, maybe we can regulate that. Maybe that's a sublation. Maybe it gets sublated into the state. And that's kind of what Hegel thought, and what some Hegelians think. And sorry, I'm just adjusting how I'm holding my dog, because my arm gets tired holding this phone. And so, the ideal is maybe we can regulate through the state. Maybe, social democracy did happen for a while, but then we must question, well, why did it go away? What was the issues? And maybe part of it is we didn't comprehend how the system really worked, therefore we couldn't regulate it properly. Nowadays, some people think that we've kind of gotten a better idea of how that really is. For example, notions of money, notions of how the state is actually funded. If you've never heard of something like modern monetary theory, look it up. It's very interesting. There is definitely something there, in my opinion, that is a serious consideration. In a sense of, if you wanted to keep the system, you would have to come to terms with something like that. The idea that this whole system of economics would have to be sublated under a state, under political powers, conscious, driving of the economy, which edges close to, say, a planned economy, but not quite what socialists and communists have in mind, and that I don't really advocate a planned economy. For the most part, I think a planned economy would just be kind of its own set of disasters. Like all things, I think it should be sublated. You know, I think it should have its place, but also be limited. So, you know, we get to keep it, but it's limited. What's a way that I could show you visually? Let me see if you can see this. Nah, I would need something bigger. What I would want to draw on the ground if I had the care to right now and wherewithal would be an infinity sign. That movement, that is sublation. If you did that fast enough, or if you just had a pencil and you did that yourself, you know, the line that it leaves behind, those are the moments, and the moving line where the pencil touches the paper, that is the sublation, that is the sublating totality. Not that mysterious, really. And when you think about how it is that you make that infinity symbol drawing, and you know, just keep retracing it with your pencil, that's exactly the process of cognition. That is the logical process of unification, because it's like a Mobius strip, where if you just walk on one side, you'll end on the other. By no weird magic, no weird trickery. It's just the reality of how things are. You know, things are contradictory, but that's not a bad thing. You know, that line creates two circles in the infinity symbol, but those two circles are created by one line. So, you know, the distinction is a unity in which the distinctions are cancelled and preserved. I mean, there's a lot of mundane examples that can be given. For example, I'm right here walking next to a lemon field. Think of a lemon, how the lemon fruit is united, you know, as a fruit, you know, as the lemon fruit. You know, the seeds, the rind, the meat, the juice, it's all sublated, you know, within that unit. And it works just fine. You know, some people have like a trouble understanding this, have a trouble accepting this. It's rather mundane. I mean, most of Hegel is unbelievably mundane. It's kind of why I ended up liking him. You know, when you realize how mundane it is, you're like, wow. How do people find that so difficult? All right, but this has been Antonio Wolf. See you around.